What does it mean for Israel? What does it mean for the Middle East? What does it mean for the entire world? I suggest we go back in time for a moment, to the year 2003 and to a different country, Libya. It was in December of that year that Libyan leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi shocked the world when he announced that his country had decided to abandon several advanced programs for the development and production of weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear bombs. A subsequent visit by officials from the US and the UK to Libya discovered that Libya was in fact developing nuclear weapons on two parallel tracks. They were enriching uranium, and they're also trying to refine plutonium, similar to the state of Iran's nuclear program today. Now, while the world was relieved that Gaddafi had decided to abandon these programs, they were still puzzled as to how Libya, which for decades had been known to have nuclear aspirations, had succeeded in fast-forwarding its program from being decades away to being only a few years away. And the answer they quickly discovered was actually found in Islamabad, Pakistan. And in the office of that country's nuclear scientist and popular national hero, Dr. Abdul Qadir Khan, more notoriously known as AQ Khan, this Pakistani scientist staying under house arrest in Islamabad, was discovered to have been running a black market ring for the distribution, sale, proliferation of nuclear technology, not just to Libya, but also to North Korea, as well as to Iran. Now, as I said before, you can tell a lot about a person by the company they keep. The same applies to countries. Iran's best friends today are North Korea and Syria. North Korea, we know, already has a nuclear weapon. Tested it. One day they're dismantling the reactor, one day they're rebuilding the reactor. Syria clearly was also on track. And for this reason, the bombing of the reactor in Syria sends a clear message to Iran that Israel will not hesitate to venture beyond its own borders and to use military force to neutralize a threat it views to be of an existential nature. It was, after all, the United States State Department that raised the possibility that it was AQ Khan's black market ring that supplied the technology or even the blueprints to Syria that were used in the construction of their nuclear reactor. Essentially, the policy that was set into effect by former Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin with the 1981 bombing of the Osirak reactor outside Baghdad in Iraq is still in effect. The assassination of Mornia, a close associate of Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and the liaison between Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards demonstrates for us how the campaign against Iran takes form. Not just in diplomacy and sanctions debated around the United Nations Security Council table, but also in carefully executed assassinations in the dark shadows of Damascus. Now, as I said, Syria's nuclear aspirations are without a doubt connected to Iran's race towards nuclear power. One of the results of Iran's success in defying the world and in developing and enriching uranium will be that other countries will follow suit. Let's just take a look today at the Middle East. And this is a point that unfortunately is missed time over again. Let's take a look at Egypt. After Israel, which receives $3 billion in foreign military aid from the United States, according to a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, signed last year, Egypt gets about $1.3 billion annually. This is since the 1979 Camp David Accords, when they made peace with Israel. Egypt, since then, with that foreign military, has built up a formidable conventional military, based on American-made platforms, Abrams tanks, Apache helicopters, Harpoon missiles. Now, if Egypt, which views itself as a regional superpower, will want to retain that status, the ante has now gone up. It's no longer enough to have a strong conventional military, which, by the way, on a side note, whenever they practice and hold exercises, strangely enough, although there is peace between Egypt and Israel, they train war with Israel. Right? When Israel exercises, holds a major exercise, and they never hold an exercise of potential war with Egypt, it's always against Syrians or Hezbollah. But if Egypt wants to retain that status, then now, as I said, the ante has gone up. It's no longer enough to have a conventional military. You'd also have to have a nuclear weapon. And therefore, it came as no surprise when earlier this year, on a visit to Cairo, French President Nicolas Sarkozy announced at a joint press conference with the Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak that France will now begin to assist Egypt in conducting nuclear research and developing potentially a nuclear civilian program. At the same time, Turkey, another regional player, a member of NATO, a country eyeing membership with the European Union, the EU, views itself as a regional player. It came as no surprise when last year Turkey passed a bill in Parliament paving the way for the construction of 3 nuclear reactors over the next 15 years. And that's not even to mention Saudi Arabia or the other states in the Gulf, the Sunni states. If their foe, their greatest adversary in Iran, the Shia, they go nuclear, then the Sunni states in the Gulf may also try to pursue such a capability. And I don't have to bore you with the idea of countries in the Middle East that aren't so stable. The prospect of the Egyptians, Mubarak's regime, there's no clear succession in place. Who would succeed him? He's an octogenarian, he's not a young man. Questionable of how healthy he is. The House of Saud in Saudi Arabia, with growing Islamic radicals on the ground. The prospect of these countries becoming a nuclear states, and then that capability falling into the hands of radicals is a very frightening scenario. At the same time, when we understand, when we take a look at what's happening in the region, we can take a look at one country in specific more clearly, is Bahrain. Bahrain is a small country in the Gulf, according to the United Nations, one of the fastest growing economies today in the world. And most recently, 2 months ago, about a month and a half ago, the King of Bahrain made an unprecedented call in public to establish a new organization of Arab states in the Middle East together with Israel. Now, you're probably all familiar with the Arab League. It's basically an umbrella organization of all the different Arab countries in the Middle East. They get together every once in a while, and mainly what they do is just bash Israel. But what the King of Bahrain's call is to establish a new, he called it the Arab League II, but Israel together, a new organization. Why would he want Israel in that organization alongside the other Arab states? And I think the answer is inside Bahrain. Take a look at Bahrain. Bahrain, the regime in Bahrain is Sunni. But the 70% of the population of Bahrain are Shia. And I don't want to bore you also with following Prophet Muhammad's death and the split between the Sunnis and the Shiites who could succeed Muhammad. Is it does it have to be direct descendant, as the Shia argued, or can it be any worthy Muslim, as the Sunnis claim? And the Sunnis won. But was once a religious disagreement, today has turned into a bloody political struggle that plays out on the battlefields of Lebanon, Iraq, Israel, Afghanistan, and all these other countries. And therefore, the regime of Bahrain is genuinely concerned with the takeover of Iran. And there are people who say that if it weren't for the United States Navy's Fifth Fleet presence in Bahrain, Iran could take over like that. In addition, you take a look at the trends this past year in military procurement. The Pentagon in 2008 approved weapon sales to the Middle East reaching a whooping $55 billion. It's a huge amount of money. Now, these are a lot of systems that the countries in the region won't begin to receive until the middle of the next decade. One example is a $17 billion deal that was approved for Israel to purchase the Joint Strike Fighter, the JSF, the F-35. It's a stealth fighter jet, 5th generation, being developed here in Fort Worth, Texas by Lockheed Martin. Israel won't begin to get it, though, in 2014, 2015. But if you look at the Sunni states in the Gulf, look at what they're buying. They are investing billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars, in ballistic missile defense systems. The United Arab Emirates, the UAE, recently received Pentagon approval to become the first country outside the United States to purchase the THAAD for $7 billion. The THAAD is the Terminal High Altitude Ballistic Missile Defense System, also being made by Lockheed Martin. That's not enough for the UAE. They're also buying PAC-3, Patriot Missile Defense Systems. And then so are the Saudis, so is Kuwait, and so are other countries. So you can ask yourself, what do they need these systems for? Are they afraid of an Israeli attack? No, of course not. Why would Israel attack any of these countries? They are, though, genuinely concerned with the prospect that Iran will become a nuclear country and one day threaten them along the way. And therefore, when you think of the fact also that they are Sunni states, Iran is Shia, one of the pillars of the Islamic Revolution from 1979 is to spread the revolution throughout the region, then they do have what to be concerned with. In addition, the possibility that Iran would provide a nuclear weapon to terrorist groups, in my opinion, well, some people will tell you it would never happen, I believe it cannot be ruled out. Considering the fact that Iran over the years has provided impressive technological capabilities to different terrorist organizations around the world, Hezbollah, insurgents in Iraq. While it's a frightening scenario and may seem slim, it still is something that cannot be completely rejected. More broadly, if Iran can get away with violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, which it is a signatory to, then the whole global system for preventing the proliferation of nuclear technology and the development of nuclear weapons will likely fall apart. To date, while some people say the NPT system is outdated, it's no longer relevant, it has been effective. Several countries, such as South Africa, which already had a nuclear weapon, dismantled their program, and other countries that were on the way also stopped in order to sign on to the NPT. And there's also no longer any real doubt that Iran's true intentions are to develop a nuclear weapon. You probably all are familiar with the NIE, the National Intelligence Estimate from last December, put up by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, a man by the name of Michael McConnell, which concluded that they could not say for certain that Iran was in effect developing a nuclear military program. While it's clear that they have a civilian program for energy purposes, they could not conclude and say for certain that they were in fact developing a military program. But just take a look at the recent IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, the United Nations nuclear watchdog, a report put out by Mohammed al-Baradei, last year's Nobel Peace Prize winner, when he caught the world's attention, when he noted the following: Iran had failed to explain the existence of a diagram for an underground testing facility, had failed to explain the testing of explosive detonators normally used for nuclear weapons, and failed to explain the existence of documents as well as a short video clip relating to the modification of Iran's long-range Shihab-3 ballistic missile to be able to enable it to accommodate a nuclear warhead. But while that may seem disturbing, take a look at the following. What I found most disturbing was an offhand passage in the report referring to work being done at a facility called the Institute for Applied Physics, the IAP. It's an Iranian military research facility. And here's the quote. The IAEA has also inquired about the reasons for the inclusion in the CV and the resume of an IAP employee of an equation for the evolving radius of a nuclear explosion ball with photos of the 1945 Trinity test. What is the 1945 Trinity test? That would be the explosion of a plutonium bomb in the New Mexico desert on July 16, 1945. So what the IAEA was asking was, why would an Iranian scientist need to have that equation on his resume, if not for the fact that his employers, the Iranian regime, saw a possible application for that equation to their country's nuclear program. Now, in all, Iran has built about 36 nuclear facilities scattered throughout the country, some of them in underground bunkers. According to Israeli intelligence estimates, Iran already has a third of the enriched uranium required to develop one nuclear bomb, and will, in the coming months, overcome technological obstacles it is still encountering with its attempts to integrate P2 centrifuges, as a more advanced centrifuge. Until now, they've been working with P1. The attempts to integrate P2 centrifuges into their facility in Natanz, where they have several thousand centrifuges spinning as we speak to enrich uranium. According to that timeline, by the end of the decade, Iran will likely become a nuclear country. Now, it was only in the early 1990s that Iran began to take up the focus of Israel's military intelligence. Until then, Iraq, with the Scuds in the first Gulf War, was perceived to be the primary threat. But then, Israel learned of the nuclear military program as well of Iran's development and production of long-range ballistic missiles called the Shihab. In response, Israel began to invest in advanced military platforms, and in the past 2 years alone has launched into space 3 spy satellites. On a side note, the most recent satellite, launched in April from India, as a matter of fact. It had to do something with the way the world revolves and gravity, and that's why they launched it from India. It's called the Texar satellite. It's a new satellite. Most satellites use a camera, right, to come down and take really high-resolution images. This satellite, though, as you can imagine, when you have fog or like visibility today here in LA, you can't really see much that's happening on the ground from space. But this satellite uses a radar technology that enables it to take high-resolution images in any weather condition, fog, cloud, no matter what. Even see through some non-concrete rooftops. You can imagine what that does for Israel's intelligence gathering capabilities. At the same time, Israel purchased long-range and sophisticated aircraft like the F-15 and F-16 from the United States, which Israeli Air Force officers boast can easily reach Iran. And Israel also made upgrades to its Arrow-2 ballistic missile defense system, which Israel claims and has tested can effectively intercept and destroy incoming Shihab and Scud missiles. This was all being done, though, while aware that a military strike against Iran's facilities would be far more difficult than the 1981 bombing of the Yossi reactor or the 2007 bombing of the Syrian reactor. There was one facility above ground. Today we talk about dozens, scattered, some of them in underground bunkers. But what Israel had to do was to create an image that, if needed, it had the will and the firepower, essentially preparing for doomsday. At the same time, Israel launched possibly one of the greatest diplomatic initiatives in its history, warning from every available podium of this growing and looming threat in Iran. And I would even say, as ironic as it sounds, that the rise to power in 2005 by Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, denier of the Holocaust, a man who persistently calls for the destruction of Israel, helped grab the world's attention. But unfortunately, not enough. Because even though several rounds of sanctions have been imposed on Iran, they have yet to change their ways, and they continue today to enrich uranium and to race, or gallop, as military intelligence in Israel likes to say, towards becoming a nuclear country. But now the presidential election is over in the United States. 2 weeks ago, Barack Obama was elected to become the 44th president of the United States. Concern in Israel is rising as to what will be the policies of this new administration, mainly with regard to Iran, but also Hezbollah, Syria, and the Palestinians. Interestingly enough, though, change of leadership is not just happening here in the United States come January 20th with the inauguration of Obama. But on February 10th, Israel will head to elections. Today, the two front runners in Israel are Kadima chairwoman, Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni, the woman who has been leading Israel's negotiation team with the Palestinians over the past year, since last November's Annapolis conference, discussing all of the sensitive issues on the table. Withdrawal from the West Bank, a division of Jerusalem. Her government today, which she is a member of, the Ehud Olmert government, is also in indirect negotiations with the Syrians over a potential withdrawal from the Golan Heights. Or will it be Likud chairman, opposition leader, former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who today is building a dream team, as we're told, bringing back all these former politicians, former Israeli Chief of Staff, Moshe Bogi Ya'alon, Benny Begin, Dan Meridor, and all these other people are joining now Likud. Will he win? He has said already in the Knesset that he will not divide Jerusalem, he will not withdraw from the Golan Heights, and he will prevent Iran from becoming nuclear. Will one of them obtain a peace deal with the Palestinians? What will they do with Iran? What will they do with Syria? These are the questions that Israel is asking itself as it heads towards February 10th. But it's also not just Israel and the U.S. In June, Iran will head to presidential elections. And also there, people are wondering what will happen. Will Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad be re-elected? He's already received endorsement of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Or will maybe some more moderate, although you always have to ask yourself, what does moderate mean in Iran? Or will a more moderate leader potentially win? Khatami, the former president, is considering throwing his hat into the ring, although has yet to officially declare that. But also in the Palestinian Authority, there is potential for another change of regime. On January 9th, 11 days before Barack Obama takes office, the presidential term of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will come to an end. Now, as we all saw, as was beautifully demonstrated in the United States 2 weeks ago, when a president's term comes to an end, you hold elections. That's how it works. Unfortunately, in the Palestinian Authority today, you haven't heard of elections because they're not holding elections. That has to do with the fact that Hamas, a terrorist group, is in charge of the Gaza Strip, and Fatah, the party that Israel is negotiating with, perceived to be the more moderate party, is in control of the West Bank. Since the coup d'etat of June 2007, when Hamas overran Fatah and took over the West Bank, they have nothing to do with one another. And Abbas has said he will only talk to Hamas if they return to the situation in Gaza to the way it was before the coup d'etat of 2007. Now, in absence of elections, according to the Palestinian Constitution, what is supposed to happen is that the Speaker of the Parliament is supposed to take over as the president. But there's a catch. Speaker of Parliament today is a man by the name of Abdelaziz Dweck, a Hamas official from Ramallah. Guess where he is? He's been in an Israeli prison for the past 2 years for terrorist involvement. So he can't now become president. His deputy, next in line, is a man by the name of Ahmed Bahar. He's from the Gaza Strip, Hamas official as well. Not in Israeli custody because he's in the Gaza Strip. And I don't have to tell you that the prospect of a Palestinian president being from Hamas means there is no peace process, there are no peace negotiations. With that said, what's more likely to happen is that Abbas will try to stay in his position. And then there is concern that Hamas may try to take over the West Bank like it did the Gaza Strip, although far more difficult considering the IDF's presence there. There's also concern that Hamas may try to assassinate Fatah officials, and Israel fears that this could spill over and potentially lead to a third intifada. But let's talk about the policies themselves. Israel is told, the world is told, that under Barack Obama's presidency, he said it in a July interview with the Jerusalem Post, he will engage Iran, and I quote, in tough, direct talks. Now, it took Israelis, 2 days to keep their mouths shut following Obama's election. Tzipi Livni, the foreign minister, said on Thursday, after Tuesday's election, that she calls on the U.S. not to engage Iran. The fear is that today a dialogue with Iran would project weakness and not power. And Israel's concern is genuine. And I believe, and the way I understand it, is that Israel is concerned that these talks, this dialogue, well, it hasn't been tried yet, but would be used to stall for time, would be misused by Iran, which doesn't have sincere intentions here in such a dialogue, and will continue to develop a nuclear weapon. And one day we'll all wake up and find out that, yes, there was this dialogue that appeared to be doing something, but Iran has become nuclear. And I say this without taking a stance on who the president should have been or would have been or who would have made a better president, but this is the way that Israel views these policies. At the same time, everything I mentioned before, whenever is likely to feature prominently on Barack Obama's agenda, let's not ignore them. Whenever the president is in office in Washington, every day he receives what's called the PDB, the President's Daily Brief. It's a summary of all the main issues, all the main events taking place in the world that day by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. All of these issues, the Palestinian Authority, Iran, Hezbollah, Syria, Hamas, will feature prominently, and he will have to make decisions of how to deal with this, and Israel is following with great trepidation. Now at the moment, over the next 9 to 10 weeks, the Bush administration will have to make two key decisions. Do we attack Iran, or do we come to terms with the nuclear Iran? And the second decision is what to do with the Annapolis Conference, launched with great fanfare last November, the renewal of peace talks between Israel and the Palestinians. And we're already told by Condoleezza Rice that there won't be a peace deal by the end of the year. At the moment, the likelihood of an American strike, an Israeli strike, or a joint American-Israeli strike against Iran appears to be low. America is currently in the throes of a profound economic crisis and facing major difficulties with its two wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The last thing it needs, some will tell you, is another war or a military venture in the Middle East. At the same time, there are signs pointing possibly in the opposite direction. Last month, in the Negev Desert in southern Israel, the X-band radar arrived. The X-band radar is one of the most advanced radars in the world today. Can track a target the size of a baseball from thousands of miles away. And it was given to Israel by the United States to link up to Israel's air ballistic missile defense system to enable it to track Iranian missiles, Syrian missiles from farther away and be able to intercept them. We have more chances of intercepting them. This could be seen as a bolstering of home front defenses ahead of a possible strike. Let's also not forget that Bush's freedom of action is far greater today than what it will be of his successor come January 20th. What Israel has been asking for and urging for the past several years are enforced economic sanctions. You look today at what's happening in the world when it comes to Iran, and you see that countries like Italy, Germany, Austria continue to do business with Iran by the billions every year. Why should Iran change its way? What Israel has called for are enforced sanctions, not like those that have been imposed until now that have to do with restrictions, the travel restrictions for nuclear scientists who are selling nuclear components, which they're able to get anyhow. Israel's one possibility that's been thrown around in Israel many times, and you've probably heard of, is to cut off the supply of refined fuel, of oil. They have loads of oil, but they can't refine it on their own. They don't have independent refining capabilities. Why not cut off that supply? That could get the regime in Iran to rethink its ways. At the same time, let's not forget that the Islamic Revolution in Iran, when it took over in 1979, promised a prosperity that never took place. Instead, you have today runaway inflation, high unemployment, growing discontent with the Iranian regime. But Israel, despite all this concern, is not stupid and has its eyes open and realizes that Barack Obama will likely engage Iran in a dialogue. And today there already is a thinking process within the Israeli Defense Ministry as well as in the Foreign Ministry of whether Israel should be in the room if that dialogue does take place. Because let's not forget, what America and Iran will be sitting down to talk about is, basically by sitting and talking to Iran, you will be recognizing and giving Iran the recognition that it is a superpower, it is a regional player. Israel has interests as well that will likely be touched upon in such a dialogue. So there's a question of whether Israel should be in the room. And if it's not in the room, how does it ensure that its interests are protected? But at the same time, Iran is not the only issue. Israel is concerned with the prospect of a premature withdrawal from Iraq, which it fears could lead to a Sunni-Shiite civil war, flare-up, clashes that could potentially lead to regional instability. Let's not forget that the regime today in Iraq will also go to elections later this year, in 2009. But they have very strong ties. They're Shia as well. They have very strong ties with Iran. And Iran is already meddling in affairs in Iran. And for that reason, it came as no surprise when in the latest multi-year plan, put out every 5 years by the IDF, by the Israel Defense Forces, Iraq wants, it's basically a plan that you lay out what military platforms you'll buy over the next 5 years, as well as you take a look and you spell out what the regional strategic picture looks like. And this past plan, put out last September, called TEFEN, the IDF once again put Iraq back in the plan after a 10-year absence. And that goes to show you how concerned Israel is with the possibility that Iraq, which in the past year alone received approval to purchase weaponry from the United States, $12 billion, how Israel is concerned that Iraq also, one day along the way, could again become a threat to Israel. Now, in the final analysis, though, what is important to keep in mind is that a strong America does mean a strong Israel. Israel is linked by the hip to the United States, strategically, militarily, ideologically, and others. And a strong United States does mean a strong Israel. And that's why, from an Israeli perspective, what is most important for this new administration to do is to restore America's image in the world. Because that ultimately will reflect on how Israel is also perceived in the Middle East. This is not a simple job, considering the difficulties that this new administration will be facing. And particularly when you take a quick glance across the Middle East, you see that Israel's strategic arena today is fraught with points of friction that could erupt at any moment. Hezbollah is still calling to avenge and to retaliate the assassination of Mornia this past February. Syria is building up weaponry, buying advanced missiles, anti-tank missiles from Russia. Israel's concerned with what will happen revolving the January 9th date to the Palestinian Authority, the possibility of a third intifada. And how the new leaders here in Israel, in Iran, in the West Bank, how they behave, conduct themselves, what they do, will undoubtedly determine their place in history. And that is why, when it comes back to Iran, the sense of urgency is evident on all military levels in Israel. I had a recent meeting with the outgoing head of the Israeli Air Force, a general by the name of Elazar Shkedi. As I'm sitting with him, he tells me how he recently gave an order to the head of his branch's history department to put together a paper comparing public remarks made by Adolf Hitler in the 1920s and 30s to those made by Ahmadinejad since his rise to power in 2005. And I don't have to tell you that that's not something that Air Force commanders do every day, right? Put together papers like this. But here's one example that is frightening. In 1922, Hitler said, "If I'm ever really in power, the destruction of the Jews will be my first and most important job." In 2005, at a conference called The World Without Zionism, Ahmadinejad said, "Israel must be wiped off the map." A few months ago, he said, "The Zionist regime is a decaying and crumbling tree that will fall with the storm." But despite all this, Israel does not believe that it is the only country being threatened by Iran. One way they arrive at this conclusion is taking a look at Iran's development of ballistic missiles. They have the Shihab series. They have the Zalzals, Fajrs, missiles they provided to Hezbollah before the war in 2006 and likely have given since the war. But they have the Shihab. Now they have the Shihab 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The 1 and 2 can reach anywhere in Israel. The 3, Yemen, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. The 4, Eastern Europe, and the 5 inches already into Western Europe. You have to ask yourself, what does Iran need missiles like this for if their only enemy is Israel? And the answer you don't have to hear from Yaakov Katz, because Ahmadinejad himself is happy to provide it. In his recent appearance before the United Nations General Assembly, which was, I think shouldn't have happened, but it does make a difference. This past September, Ahmadinejad embarked on a discourse about the wonders of the 12th Imam. Now, you would have thought he would have come to the UN to talk about how his country's nuclear program is really for civilian purposes, to reassure the world. Instead, he embarks on this discourse about the wonders of the 12th Imam. Now, for those of you who may be unacquainted with the more obscure tenets of Islamic theology, the 12th Imam, also known as the hidden Imam, is held by devout Shiite Muslims to be a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, and to have in the 9th century, at the age of 5, gone into hiding, never to have been seen since. His followers, among them Ahmadinejad, who, by the way, is mayor of Tehran, expanded one of the main thoroughfares, one of the main drags in Tehran, from a 4-lane highway to an 8-lane highway to accommodate the arrival of the hidden Imam. But he believes that the hidden Imam, these followers believe that when the hidden Imam will return, is only after a period of cosmic chaos and bloodshed, that some of us might call the apocalypse. And then he will lead the world into an era of universal peace. Let me quote to you from what he said. "The era of Western predominance is drawing to a close, and will soon be replaced by a bright future, ushered in by the 12th Imam's return. O great Almighty, deliver the Savior of nations, and put an end to the sufferings of mankind, and bring forth justice, beauty, and love." The bottom line is that for Ahmadinejad, we cannot fool ourselves. Israel is not the only threat. The great Satan, the United States, the country we're in, the European Union, the UK, Canada, and other Western countries are also in their sights and targets. And how we also know this is when you take a look at Iran's influence. It's not just being felt on the nuclear track. They are the greatest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, with proxies all over the Middle East. They have the al-Sadr Shiite Mahdi army in Iraq, the Alawi regime in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the West Bank and Gaza, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan. Why do they use proxies? Because this way they avoid getting their hands dirty, obtaining maximum instability, but with minimum responsibility. And from a historical perspective, I would argue that Ahmadinejad and his allies have reason to believe that they can't succeed, and that their objective to destroy the state of Israel is on track. They take credit for pushing the Americans out of Lebanon in the early 80s, the Soviets out of Afghanistan in the late 80s, Israel out of Lebanon with its withdrawal in 2000 from the security zone, Israel's withdrawal in 2005 from Gaza, the Spanish withdrawal from Iraq in 2004, and as well as denying Israel a victory in the summer of 2006 in the war it fought against Hezbollah. Everything I spoke about needs to be viewed from the prism of the 2006 Lebanon. Let's take a look just at the results very quickly. 4,000 rockets pounded northern Israel from Haifa north, displacing about 1 million Israelis. The most rockets in any modern war. 122 soldiers were killed, 43 civilians. I used to say 119 soldiers, but then we got back Regev and Goldwassers, that went up to 121, and then one soldier who was injured during the war recently passed away, so we've hit now 122. 122 soldiers, 43 civilians killed during the war. Extensive damage caused throughout the northern Israel. Israel, in return, caused extensive damage in southern Lebanon, in the Dachia neighborhood of Beirut, which was where Hezbollah's main command posts were. But despite all that, 600 to 700 Hezbollah guerrillas who were killed, Hezbollah today is stronger than it was before the war. Before the war, they had 15,000 rockets. Today, they have 30 to 40,000. With longer ranges and greatly larger warheads, capable of encompassing the entire state of Israel. They have anti-aircraft missiles. No longer does Israel have the freedom to fly over Lebanon like it used to. They have anti-ship missiles, radar systems. Basically, while I believe there is a new diplomatic reality in Lebanon, that's a whole separate issue. What happened in the war, the results of the war joined a process that had begun in the year 2000, which saw the decline of Israel's level of deterrence. In 2000, Israel withdrew from Lebanon, southern Lebanon, where it had maintained a security zone for 18 years, since 1982, and was perceived to have been chased out by Hezbollah. That process, that decline continued in 2005 when Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, and in January 2006, the following elections, Hamas came to power, and we all know the results today. And that continued to decline in the war in 2006. And I would say that most recently, what we're seeing today are attempts by Israel to restore its level of deterrence. The assassination of Mornia sends a clear, which demonstrates for us how the campaign against Iran takes form. It does, in my opinion, send a clear message to other countries, other terrorists, and other terror groups. And while Israel is not taking responsibility, claimed responsibility for the assassination, makes no difference because it's a question of perception. When terrorists know that decades after perpetrating attacks, they can still be caught, nabbed, targeted, that does create a message. That trickles down. The targeting, the bombing of the Syrian reactor sends a message to Iran that Israel, the only country in the world to have destroyed 2 reactors, not 1 but 2, no other country's ever destroyed a reactor, to have destroyed 2 reactors, does not hesitate to use force when it views a threat to be of an existential nature. Now in the IDF, you go into any officer's office, they have 2 phones on their desk. One is a red phone and one is a white phone. The white phone is used for regular, routine, mundane phone calls. The red phone is a secure, encrypted line used for classified phone conversations. Now there are some officers who have a red phone next to their bed at home at night. One of them is the head of Israeli military intelligence, a general by the name of Amos Yaakov. His previous post was military attaché here in Washington. Yaakov recently told me that his red phone at home next to his bed rings almost every night. That's not what's interesting. What's interesting is what he said next, is that he never knows what the phone call will be about. And that's because today, 60 years of existence, Israel is still threatened on so many different fronts. You have the Iranian nuclear program, that could be what the phone call is about. Syrian plans, they're rebuilding, they are rearming, building up changes in military formation. Hezbollah plans to kidnap soldiers or retaliate to avenge the assassination of Mornia. Hamas plans to kidnap another soldier, we didn't mention Gilad Shalit, still being held almost 900 days later inside the Gaza Strip. As well as the possibility that global jihad, Al-Qaeda, has said that Israel is one of their main targets for the coming year. So even though Israel has been around for 60 years, there are countries in the region, people, who have yet to come to terms with the fact that there is a Jewish independent state within their midst. And I would say that ultimately, though, it is the resilience and fortitude of the Israeli people that's demonstrated to me on a daily basis that will ensure that we continue to survive. I recently saw it in the 2006 war, went up in Haifa to hear briefings from the IDF, had a break and decided to go outside. And I don't know if any of you were in Israel during the war, but what was striking up north was how everything was closed. Post offices, banks, grocery stores, you name it, shut down. And I'm walking through Haifa and I see one store open, a flower shop. And the guy's out there watering his flower pots. And I said to him, couldn't hold back, what are you doing open? Everybody's indoors. No one's open. And he looked at me with a straight face and said, I want people to know that if they want flowers, they have where to go. So then I said to myself, this guy is clearly Meshuggah. Right? But then I realized exactly what the message was. And that is that really people may want flowers. Life does go on. And that resilience, that fortitude is what got Israel through its wars that it's fought every decade since its establishment. The War of 48, of 56, of 67, of 73, of 82, the First Intifada, the Second Intifada in 2000, as well as the Second Lebanon War in 2006. That resilience, that fortitude is what I believe will ensure Israel's victory ultimately against its enemies. Before, we spoke about deterrence. And the ultimate test of deterrence is to see if your enemy is willing to do something today that they were not willing to do the day before. And for that, when it comes to Israel, only time will tell. Thank you very much.